Hi, Luca. Happy New Year to you and to everyone who will watch this. And thanks for doing this again. Uh,
Hi, Nacho. Thank you for inviting me again.
of course, always welcome. And third time, so you are
Yes.
like a star invited to these Bagatelle conversations. You were in the first one that the recording went not well, but I published the transcript. And you see that I always appreciate talking to you, but I especially appreciate talking to you in what regards the pandemic, because I consider you like a very good filter mechanism, to get adequate and non-biased information, you do your own independent analysis, and your
Thank you.
heart is on the good place as well. And actually the first one that we did, we were just starting the lockdowns. We were all very frightened, or well, not frightened, but stuck at home, and everything had gone out of control. And the second one, I went through the second one. I didn't go through the first one, but I went through the second recording that we did. It was slightly more than 1 year ago. It was, well, with Mark Baker. We talk about your previous book, Ergodicity. We talk about vaccine, that the risks that we saw was the vaccine that had just started by then.
Yes.
It was early December, and the UK were administering the first doses. It was not even approved in Italy or in Spain, where we are ourselves. And we were just some of the things that we were discussing. Um, let's say we will come to that, but I think that there have been randomized controlled trials, and that was the best data that was available when we're talking now. I think that the vaccines, I more or less checked, have been rolled out over half of the world's population right now. So it's like 4 billion doses, something like that, and more. So it's a completely different picture than we will talk then. And also some things have changed since we talked then, because I remember I just went through that conversation. I let go like a hypothesis, if my government will ask me for a stamp to get into places, um, I may take the vaccine, and that materialized. Was just throwing that out without any actual insight to know that that would happen. Um, so regarding the risks of the vaccine, that played out that the vaccine is not very toxic, and many things happened since last year. And you also wrote a book, a Pandemic Guidebook, that I read over the weekend as well. And sorry, the introduction is getting so long. It's just divagating a bit, but you also made a choice that you explained in the introduction of the book that was not a simple one, because the pandemic is still with us as we speak. Actually, there are more people getting infected of COVID than at any other point in almost 2 years now, not almost 2 years now that we are into this. And you said in the introduction of the book that on the one hand, it was a difficult choice to get this book out because the vaccine is still unfolding and we are not at the end of it. So it may age very soon. But also you wanted to capture the moment and the conversations that were happening, and that for that it was better to almost live write it, so to say. I may be wrong when I say this, but that's what I understood. And you made this peculiar choice also, and you are going to issue the book in 3 different releases: book 1, book 2, book 3. Book 1, that is the one that I got, book 1 will be dealing with how did we get here and what has been going on so far, right? And I think that book 2 is probably how do you suggest we should do moving forward, and book 3 like lessons to learn for future pandemics, if I'm putting this correct.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The reason I'm publishing them in 3 separate volumes is that I wanted them to be available as soon as possible so that people can learn and apply the learnings of it as soon as possible. The main objective of the book is to give clear, precise tools and examples so that people can explain to their friends, to their family, what are the actions that matter. And therefore, I wanted to get it out as soon as possible so that people can start implement and having the discussion as soon as possible.
Well, and something that and in the first chapters, I get immediately out of your several things. First, it's a painful read. And not because the book is not, it's just because it reminds us of some things. It's also, let's say, like, and I will set it out, I have no claim of expertise. I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a virologist. So I have no claim on expertise on this topic. You make a disclaimer at the beginning of your book, is that you are no virologist, that you are no epidemiologist. Also that if someone will misread you, that you don't take any liability out of possible potential misreadings, but that you were pretty satisfied with your own record, so to say. And this is just, I recovered some conversations that you and I had over Twitter 4 days before the ECDC would meet in the 19th of February of 2020 to assess the COVID risk as low, which is like crazy. So like you and I were like, and then there was a doctor in that loop, were saying that it's crazy that you are saying that this is just, you know, well, whatever, a bad cold or something like that. And the ECDC 4 days later issued. So we were like, I put in the tweet a tweet, hypothesizing of a potential collapse of the medical facilities. I didn't know that that would happen, just laying out as a possibility. You know, if you have a very contagious disease that it is slightly worse than a cold, then that's a possibility that it is there. And nevertheless, you know, there's that whatever conversations we were having, the recommendations were consistently going into, when it mattered the most, into the bad direction. Right. So
yes, the reason I make the disclaimer at the beginning of the book is not because I don't want to take responsibilities, and it's not because I claim no expertise. What I'm claiming is I'm claiming a different expertise, and I'm pointing out that we've relied on the wrong kinds of expertise. A virologist knows a lot about what happens once the virus gets into your body, but doesn't know what happens at the pandemic level, doesn't know how to prevent the pandemic, doesn't know how the virus spreads at the level of the population. Then I claim, for example, that I'm not a medical doctor. Again, medical doctors have the expertise on how to cure single patients, which is extremely different from the expertise on how to prevent mass contagion. Because at the level of the single patient, you need to know exactly what are the interactions between the virus, the antibodies, the medicines. You need to know how proteins work and so on. At the level, instead of preventing the spread of a virus, you don't need all those competencies. You need another set of competencies, such as understanding statistics, understanding exponentials, understanding how populations behave at the level of population, and so on. And one key problem of the pandemic that led us to have a mass pandemic was the reliance on the wrong type of experts, taking decisions which were out of their field.
And relying on the wrong expertise, because some of these experts appear to be, I mean, for me, I cannot take them any longer very seriously after what happened, but assume that they were public health experts at the WHO. But also this with I've taken from other scientists that even were talking to these experts, is that they were it was like a monoculture. Okay, so there is this Spanish guy who is a physicist from the University of Boulder, Colorado. I don't know, his name is Jose Luis Jimenez, and he made some papers about aerosol transmission. And he said that at those like meetings at the WHO, there was not one single person who was an expert on aerosol transmission. You know, this is he says, I don't pretend that that every guy in that table need to know about aerosols, but it would be a good thing that at least there is one person in that table that knows about aerosols and about physics. So some of the frameworks of public health were wrong. In case that you don't know, you presume that it is fomites, and it's apparently that there were historical reasons for that. It's taking all from this guy that I'm telling you. He did some presentations, some research on this topic. So apparently, during a previous pandemic, I think it was Spanish flu or something like that, even if it was also probably transmitted by air, they were not confident that if they were afraid, and I think that at some extent something similar happened today, to communicate that that was transmitted by air, because it would then a certain fatalism would catch up among the population. That was the the presumption, and that there were measures that were effective to prevent transmission, like washing your hands or minimum hygiene measures, that they wanted to get enforced. And so somehow they directed the communication towards that those measures were the ones that they were preventing transmissions, because they were more hopeful that people would comply. You see? And apparently, ever since then, we have not had such a major pandemic ever since then. Every manual of public health was repeating those things as if they were true tenets, and that there were things that were said on a very particular circumstance at a peculiar point of time, and over presumptions that were probably wrong, at least at some level. But anyway, see, something also about your book that is very detailed about the lab leak theory, that you say you have this line in your book that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a theory, right? And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and this is something that really makes my blood boil every time I hear it. When I hear, for example, the lab leak is a conspiracy theory, it's not. Conspiracy theory means that there was a group of people who intentionally and decided to take together a set of actions. A scientist that is making some experiments in a virus lab in good faith, and then has an incident, and the virus gets out of containment from a virus lab, that there is no conspiracy there.
Exact.
Another thing that I was tweeting about today is that I keep hearing tweets such as, that now in the US they're shortening quarantines. And I keep hearing tweets such as, oh, it's the elites that for profit seeking, they want the workers to go back to work so that they can make more money themselves. And it's true for a few cases of that, but my impression is that everyone, like most people across all classes, are underestimating the virus and are not doing their own part. Because if everyone cared about the virus, we will see everyone wearing N95 masks. And the fact that everywhere I go indoor, there is maybe 10% of the people who are wearing an N95 means that 90% of the population decides not to do what it takes to defeat the virus. And it's not, therefore, it's not because necessarily because our elites are looking for, they have some plan to maximize their profits. It's just either because people don't understand what's going on, or because simply they're looking for the path of least resistance.
Well, going back to conspiracy theory, finding a conspiracy theory is not so easy, okay? Because well, not many. I'll say I'm not interested in conspiracy theories, but is it like some things that used to be conspiracy theories become like mainstream afterwards, you know? So if you are suspicious of any of them, you may risk to be very wrong in some occasions. Because for me, many times what it's labeled a conspiracy theory is just because it has not jumped into the mainstream speech, or it has been canceled, so to say, and then I think that today the fact is I was checking records. Joe Biden asked for an investigation on the lab leak in May this year, something like that. Washington Post and New York Times run stories on it, giving it a high degree of plausibility. So it stopped at the point of when the mainstream accepted it as a hypothesis that it is good to have in public circles. Then it stops being a conspiracy theory. And as you say, right now, I will say that it's no longer a conspiracy theory, it's just a theory. But when you go, and let me see, as you say, you know, personally, my own travel around this is very early in the beginning, you had even like these guys in France that are the Gilets jaunes, etc., publishing videos that this was a conspiracy theories, you know, we're making like, what is a conspiracy theory? Also, it's a bit there, because for me, it becomes a conspiracy theory, not only when it's out of the mainstream, as in the case of the lab leak, but it becomes a true conspiracy theory when you put some intent, as you were saying, you know, that someone was engineering events, right? And this is like some kind of anthropomorphism. This is from John Gray's book, The Soul of the Marionette. You know, you presume that someone is directing the course of history or the course of events when history itself has a lot of entropy. You know, no one could have scripted this. So when you presume that the events follow a script, it's like someone you're putting a certain causality that is not there, you know. Then some of these stories that guys were telling in April 2020 in Facebook, this Gilets jaunes about like mass corporations leaking this virus, etc., do look like actual conspiracy theories. But what you were mentioning, that just someone like manipulating a very dangerous virus carelessly, that's not a conspiracy theory, that's an accident. And what I discovered in your book is that it has happened many times over. That's what is really scary, and that puts really a big question mark on. And at the end, you said that the charge of proof should be on the guys who believe that this is not a lab leak, to provide the proof that there is an animal host and that this is not a lab leak, because otherwise, not having found an animal host and having so much rich a history of events that maybe you can tell us about those, of virus escaping from labs, then it not just becomes a theory, it becomes like the best theory that we have at this point.
Exactly. And people keep saying that that zoonosis theory, so the idea that the virus generated from some animal reservoir and then accidentally come in contact with humans, people keep saying that it's the most likely theory. But I don't understand why, because just in the US, over the last 5 years, there has been more than 450 laboratory incidents involving deadly pathogens. And my question is, how many natural spillovers have there been in the US? More than 450? I don't think so. And the same thing is that there were 3 laboratories around the world that were experimenting on coronaviruses on bats. One of those was Wuhan. So what are the chances that of all the places in which natural spillover can happen, it happens exactly in one of the 3 places in which there were corresponding incidents? And then we can see that Wuhan was considered like one of the places in China with the least likelihood of natural spillover before the coronavirus pandemic. So if you try to run the probabilities, you discover that the lab leak is the most likely hypothesis. And so the burden of proof should be on the
well, and also if there was an animal host, and I think you said, but I may have recorded the number wrong, that there were 8,000 candidates that were tested for that, and all came, so to say, negative. It would be every day that passes, it would be more likely that we would have found it. Whereas if it was a lab leak, I would expect, and just like a normal incentive setup by people trying to keep their jobs. If I was working on a lab that caused the worst pandemic of the century, I would probably try to keep it low profile or remove all proofs to keep my job, right? Because that's when it comes to some other sections of your book. We can question altogether the necessity of having laboratories that are doing things like gain of function research, or more exactly having laboratories in a cities like Wuhan. Maybe if we do need these laboratories, which is a questionable premise, we should have them like in Tonga or wherever, and that you only reach that lab after having followed a strict quarantine of several weeks of isolation or whatever, right?
Exactly, like literally the first sentence of the proper book is a question of whether we should trust the field of virology, which is the same field that liked the idea of having a virus lab in the middle of a 10 million city, which is Wuhan, which is the most dangerous place where to have it. So I'm like, which experts are we asking for? It's like if someone decided in a place full of earthquakes to build a nuclear plant without earthquake technology, and then we kept asking them advices on how to build nuclear plants. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, which is that's the thing that we're still, I mean, not talking about Wuhan, but the WHO they are still, media is still touting WHO this, WHO that. It's like people not imprinting on themselves, like, these guys maybe don't know what they are talking about. I don't know, but anyway, it's very frustrating when you go back on the record, as in your book, and you see how badly they failed, and well, and how things have taken us here. Just go to that, because WHO. They didn't recommend when they gave the alert, and you were subscribed to their alert system. You explain it in your book. They were not recommending travel restrictions in the 5th of January 2020, but I think even months later they were not doing so. So I lived that very closely, because was working. I had a colleague next to my desk who was working on a project to roll out some software implementation in Shanghai, and he was due to go to Shanghai, and the company canceled his trip by the end of January. The company, because apparently people in China, they were closer, and they were freaking out for good reason. No one wanted to freak out. They don't want to to go to office, etc. So they didn't want to send a guy from Switzerland to Shanghai if the people in Shanghai themselves didn't want to go to the office. Yeah, the thing is that nothing prevented them, those people, to travel. There was no instruction, and actually it's like the WHO took upon themselves like the contrary of that recommending quarantines that maybe the governments would have overlooked because they don't have an executive power, the WHO. But instead of applying the precautionary principle, it's like they had taken upon themselves that they had to make the case for not to have travel restrictions, and that they should be the ultimate body issuing that kind of recommendation, that they not relying on national governments, because national governments would apply these travel restrictions to so to say, without much knowledge, and they would have apparent better knowledge, and they did not issue travel bans at any point of time, almost until the governments started doing them by themselves, which is sort of a disgrace. And you mentioned that there was a pact that was signed in 2005 that you named the Suicidal Pact. That was over those lines, more or less.
Yes, exactly. Like, one thing I'm pointing out is that the WHO's decisions to not recommend travel restrictions was something that was scripted 15 years before, when all our countries, 194 countries, came together to sign a paper called the International Health Declarations of 2005, that basically was telling the WHO that in case of an outbreak, it shouldn't recommend travel restrictions. It's a bit more nuanced than that. I explained it in the book, but that was the substance in my eyes. And that was a major vulnerability in our system. We are relying on a body to sign an alarm bell at the same time in which we told him not to ring any alarm bells. And I think that that's absurd. And even more absurd is that to date, as far as I know, we're still doing that. We still didn't learn our lessons. We still didn't patch this vulnerability.
It's like a Groundhog Day dog, or that movie Groundhog Day. The guy who's living the same day over and over. Bless you. Yeah, I have the same impression. So more fails. I'll go first through this because it's not exactly the order that you follow in your book, but the communication. For instance, a tweet that you quote in your book about end of January, almost April 2020, so 28th of March 2020, of WHO saying that COVID is not all airborne. So that so it's an implicit recommendation of not to use masks. It's crazy. It's crazy how bad they had it, and I think that only recently they have started, they kept on this denial almost for over a year, and only recently they started making recommendations about mask usage, among others, and now ventilation. But they took it so long, so they were. So we had understood, any of us looking at how was going on, that that open doors were safer, and that this was transmitted by air, and that mask could be an intelligent thing to use, especially in the East. You mentioned that your in-laws, right, in Singapore, they had a stack of masks, and the first thing that they did when the things, something close to SARS was out there, was using their face masks, which was the sensible recommendation, the sensible thing to do when you don't know, right? So washing your hands may also be sensible, but that does not preclude you from using a face mask, right? But the WHO was actively, and many doctors actually on Twitter as well. At that time, at that point, I was even debating some of those, were recommending against face masks. So it's,
yeah, exactly.
it's great.
And that's one point that two points that I'm making in the book is that once there was a scarcity of face masks in the West, that then created this need for politicians to lie about their effectiveness so that they could be reserved to healthcare workers. But that was that wasn't like a decision to have the scarcity. Like after SARS, when the world understood the need for face masks, many countries stocked up on face masks. And then it was the bureaucrats that decided when the face mask expired 10, 15 years, 5, 10, 15 years later, not to renew the stock.
But
and that was another, yeah, that was another idiocy because face masks don't really expire.
Well, that was an idiocy, like removing stocks of face masks seems like crazy today, but also the conception of things, because also, you know, something that I don't know very well, Luca, because some of these guys who were saying, among them, it's on your book and not for good reasons, this sort of emergency expert coordinator in Spain, whose name is Fernando Simon. This guy was getting it wrong as the WHO and worse over and over when it mattered most. No one listens to him anymore, but it doesn't matter, it's too late. This guy was saying first that masks were not used because there was no evidence that they will protect you against coronavirus. So we're again having the charge of evidence completely backwards. And later on, he said what you were saying. You know, that actually it's like we're running out of masks, so we had to do that kind of communication, and it may be well that, but then you say, like, these guys, how cynical they are, right? It's because if they had a problem that there was not sufficient stocks of masks, which it was obviously the case because that was happening, instead of calling to our better angels, and there was at least one politician in Spain who did this. It was the president of Castile Leon, you know, that we in Spain have like this decentralization, etc. So health policies are mostly decentralized. The vice president of Castile Leon, I think, was also in charge of healthcare. He made at the same time that this guy was saying that mask has no use. He's a doctor, by the way. His name is Francisco Igea. This guy made a call the press and said, like, fellows, we are running out of masks, and there is a glut in the supply chain, the distribution of masks right now. So China is not shipping them or whatever. You know, this was another of the problems, you know, that every mask was coming from China, apparently. So we call the public, you know, to help us with that by not hoarding masks. And if they have masks at home, please go to your closest health center and give them, because we are sending our soldiers, so to say, you know, the workers that are exposed to the virus and they are taking care of the sick people to this disease without proper equipment. He did that, you know, and it's like, I don't think that people were hoarding masks at them. It's just there was this glut of supply chain, and anything like the public or the government was saying was not going to change that fact, you know. But at least his heart was in the right place, and he made the right calls. He did not decide to lie to the population about the usefulness of masks. He just said that we don't have them, and that there should be a priority in the allocation of these masks. And like, probably a guy who is close at his home or whatever is not the guy who will need them the most. And this anyone could have anyone understood that, and anyone would have understood that. And if there was inventive solutions, I think that in the Czech Republic at the time, they decided to invite people to do their own at home and that sort of thing. So there were ways to maybe navigate the situation better than just lying the population about face masks, with the consequence that we saw later, right? That you have a lot of people who became cynical for good reasons about use of face masks. And you mentioned that people are not using them or not using them properly today, which is a disgrace.
Yes, and yeah, the fact is that after 2 years, we still have the same problems. Like now, most people are wearing face masks, but we should already have upgraded to N95s, for example, or better. And even in the hospitals, which are the first place where people would be supposed to wear a proper mask, we're still not wearing them. And
even in hospitals, you said that you have been to hospitals, but I think that was for reasons very different from COVID, I'm afraid, right?
Yes.
But I think you are feeling better, I hope.
Yes, yes, but I struggle to see doctors wearing N95s, of course, not even patients. I was wearing the N95 every time I was going to the hospital, because that's a major, seems to me like one of the riskiest places to be, to protect yourself and to protect the doctors that were seeing me. And I think that the percentage of doctors wearing N95s that I've seen was probably around 25%, plus or minus 15%.
Well, this is, I don't understand that, Luca, but I've been to the hospital myself, and maybe I will come to that. Not much. I try to avoid as much as possible, that I have been. And in Geneva, when you were going to the hospital, you go with the 995, and I've seen similar reports on Twitter on other occasions. I don't know, I should have asked someone about the logic about that, but is that they were asking you to remove your mask, put it in a pocket, and put a surgical mask when you, as soon as you enter the hospital. These were instructions, and there were people at the door of the hospital delivering this. I don't know the reason. I can only have a guess. I'll next time I'll go, I'll ask, I promise. But apparently this has been the case in several cases. So I was going with an N95 and forced to get into the hospital with a surgical mask. I guess that they prefer like a lower standard that everyone is wearing, so to say, than relying on the mask that you bring from home. That may be, like in my case, an N95, or it may be like a thong, or like something that you have made out of like some elastic that you had at home, and that is not offering good protection. I don't know, but that's my suspicion.
But I think that this is crazy. This is what I call minimum common denominator healthcare. The idea, which is sadly promoted also by WHO and so on, that since not everyone has access to the same protections, medicaments, cure, and so on, then everyone should use the more accessible one, even if it's worse.
But I think that there is,
crazy.
I don't know if it's that crazy, you know, just because it's so often the time, and reading your book, you may like have a good case to conclude, so that you know that people in charge don't know what they are doing. But I try to be charitable. Okay, so it's like, okay, someone made a calculation and they just presume that the number of guys wearing an N5 that would go there, or an N5 in proper condition, would be lesser than the number of guys that would go with one that they have done with old socks that they had at home. And then for public health reasons that sometimes are not the same as individual medicine, as you were mentioning earlier, for the general benefit, it's better that just everyone wears a surgical mask. I'm just trying to be charitable here. I don't know if that's the reason behind, because I found it very odd. And you know that they didn't have the time also to check which kind of masks and the station, how good your mask was at the entrance of the hospital. So it just was an easier solution to say everyone wearing this mask. I'm not saying, I suspect that this is not very sensible because it has not been done around, only very specific places, and some people that I've heard on Twitter say that it didn't make any sense. Were asked to remove an N95 to put a surgical mask. But I presume that there is some type of reasoning of this kind behind that decision. And maybe it's not that stupid. I don't know.
I don't know. I tend to think that it's much more likely that it's stupid, because it really doesn't take much to distinguish on hospital check-in whether someone is wearing an N95 or not.
I don't know. Maybe
it really. I think that it's something that you can teach in 10 minutes to the top, to the top 50% of the population, and it takes them 2 seconds to check 90% of the patients.
In February, I shall go back to Geneva probably, and if I have the opportunity to find out, I didn't do any research. Why? How do they justify that? I promise I will ask you a question and tell you how they were reasoning around this one. Anyway, it's a bit depressing to go over the fails that brought us here, but your book also offers some insight on the way the virus has been spreading. So last time we talked, we were like in the second wave of the virus. It was a bit more than a year ago. Now it depends on which country and how you count. We are in the 5th, 6th wave. So the virus has a clear pattern that comes and goes. Everyone has noticed this, even the media. You don't need even to be an intelligent layman, as you say, to have made the observation. It's not uncommon on other viruses. You mentioned that the flu in the 1918 to 1920 pandemic had, I think, 3 major waves, right? And you give us some of the reasons that explain that the virus transmits like this, as changes in weather, maybe humidity is something that I've seen reported. Seasonality, right, various variants, but you spend some pages explaining about the structure of networks, and maybe I'll let you explain us about it.
Yes, so one key thing to understand how the virus spreads is that it doesn't spread homogeneously across a population, but it spreads network to network. So what happens is that during the first wave, for example, if let's say 5% of the population had COVID, that's not 5% in Milan, 5% in Rome, 5% in Sicily, and so on. Instead, it's much more something like people who knew the first people that were infected in February 2020. Of these groups of people, maybe 70% of them got the virus. If you were far away, for example, you were in Sicily, you almost didn't get the chance to know someone that had the virus. And what happens is that the virus usually gets inside the network. For example, let's say that there is a guy called Mark or John that goes to John went to China during early January 2020. He comes back. He was sick. He goes to the office. The network of John, so that John's colleagues, John's gym's friends, would be the first 2 networks that come in contact with the virus. And within those networks, the virus tends to spread very rapidly.
And some immunity will be built.
let's say that John used to work in London. If you lived in London, but you didn't go to John's company or you didn't go to John's gym, the chances that you knew someone that had COVID were extremely low. And so for you, effectively, you were almost immune from the virus. There was no chance that you would get sick. And so during the first, let's say, mini wave, it only spreads within the friends of John and colleagues of John.
For the
Then
sake of
John's friends and colleagues
explanation, yes.
get sick, and then the second mini wave will happen within the networks of John.
And some networks are, even if they are physically close, they are not particularly well connected. So maybe if John is someone who is working as, I don't know, an international company, people within the company of John in whatever in Geneva will get it first, then I don't know, some butcher in a market that it is far from John's office that will never come in contact with them, right? So that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. And the same thing, like if John, for example, happens to smart work, then his effective network is much smaller.
Exact. So, well, again, I wanted to close with that, but I had made a note also about one more failure is the creation of even when it was already spread out too late to control or to avoid the spread, governments creating bottlenecks. And I mean, see, somehow Europe at the beginning proved to be slower in the rollout of vaccines, for instance, as that was the case in the United States. So then we catch up at the end. Well, I think you give examples also of masks, for instance, that there was a glut because the Italian government, I think, put a price of 50 cents for each mask, so no one was interested in selling them, something like that, right? And I don't think, because I was in Italy last year already, so we are 2022. I think that they created also, we have such a glut in Spain with tests, you know, because for whatever stupid reasons, my government was reluctant, even when others were doing it, to make it readily available. So they were like supposing that people will make a test and then do stupid things you know, go to parties, etc., and spread the disease, which it may have occurred, but it's not like what most people are doing, you know, with these tests. And well, they were just glutting the distribution of tests, and only very recently they have been made available in pharmacies, and right now pharmacies are selling them at a very high markup because they sell them like crazy, and in other countries it's like almost half as cheap as they are in Spain. But in Italy, what I observed is that you have green pass mechanism, you know, that you need to show proof of vaccination or test to, for instance, go to a museum, you know. So in Spain, this is coming slowly. And I was there, I was in Sardinia, for instance, in October. I was in Naples in September. I did some tests, and I noticed that the antigenic tests that are certified and that can go into the green pass, or at least at that point in time, were capped at €15. And if the pharmacist takes like 15 minutes to do those, that is more or less what they take. So even more, you know, when you are a foreigner and they don't have your you know, your fiscal number and that sort of thing in Italian, it would take them even more than 15 numbers to register in the database. So there was a very low incentive for pharmacists to offer the tests. So when I was in Italy, when I wanted to get tested, it was very difficult because the few pharmacies that were offering the service, they were often like glutted or you had to, go in advance. And if I was traveling, I could not know in advance in which close to which pharmacy I was there. So I think that they also managed to create a glut on tests by the same token, and so I don't know if it's a bad thing to put a maximum price tag on tests, because there may be abuses, but it cannot be as low that that you incentivize almost anyone who would want to do them in good faith to do them, because then you create a scarcity.
Yes, I think that that's one problem. Like the other problem of green passes, I think, is that it gave the impression to people that have the green pass that those people are not contagious, that you can go in green pass reserved spaces and you're safe. And I think that that was some bad communication.
Well, there was creating that expectation, I think,
yes.
Well,
and there are people who lied about the effectiveness of vaccines. They said that the vaccine, and virologists, there is a very famous Italian virologist that goes on TV every week that said at some point that if you have the vaccine, you're not contagious. And yes,
well,
that was
and
terrible.
Joe Biden, you mentioned in the book, in late July 2021, he was saying that get vaccinated,
Exactly.
you won't get this. So it's again, it's like with the masks, right? So we are setting an expectation that some people will not be as cynical to say like they are lying to me, and it will ricochet, because as you are mentioning, it's like shifts the distraction, but at the end it's like and if you consider, well, this is a complex topic, right? But that you are lying for greater good. So when I come to this also, they were lying because they were stupid. When Fernando Simon was saying that there was no evidence that mask works, he was just showing up how stupid he is, or he's clearly cynical when later he said that he was doing so because he wanted like masks to be only for hospitals, and that was, he preferred to appear as cynical as stupid, but I don't rule out that he's just very stupid, it's same. I mean, maybe same goes for Joe Biden. Maybe he was lying like because he wanted to persuade people to get vaccinated and say like it's a white lie because getting a vaccine is a good thing. So I will say this: more people will go to get vaccines, and or he just believed that. No, it's I don't rule out that he said I get my booster and then I don't get the virus. He really believed that. And the funny thing about this is that 1 year ago, or more than 1 year ago, the conversation that was mentioning between you and I and Mark Baker was there also. We didn't know for a fact, but the communication was mostly correct. They said like, we don't know if after you get the vaccine, you may be transmitted, but it's better that you still wear your face mask because you may be infectious. And it was what happened. Very soon it was obvious that was the case, but even as that was realizing and it was becoming obvious, people like Joe Biden were saying these things, and well, and then now we will have a lot of vaccine hesitancy because people have been lied of, and it's, I mean, it's too easy to just call people anti-vaxxers on their face, and not assess valid points that people will also have about having been lied so many times that they just don't believe anything that people in high places are telling them.
Yeah, on this, I think that both Biden and Fernando Simon, on one side, I believe that they are stupid. And the fact that Fernando Simon was one of the first people in Spain that actually got the virus make me think that he wasn't also the brightest. But I also think that there is there is some level of guilty negligence, because the moment that Joe Biden said that the vaccines fully protect you 100%, I'm sure that someone called the lie, or at least said, look, it's not true, there is data. And that's this idea of not correcting one's mistake, which is the one that makes you guilty.
Well, actually, that someone that you mentioned, let's say, hypothetically, but of course, that's also the other thing, you know, if Joe Biden thinks that by saying this, he will persuade more people, it may actually be the other way around, you know, that people are so negatively disposed against Joe Biden that if Joe Biden says, don't take this vaccine, maybe some Trump supporter will want to take it. But anyway, just let's not go with paradoxical kind of logic. That he was actually enforcing that hypothetical person that you said. When he said that, someone called that one as a lie, and he was proven right, you know. And maybe that guy who was like proven right by Joe Biden's like is a dangerous fool. Right? So it's a very dangerous dynamic that is at play by communicating in this way. And so you say in your book that you don't think that the COVID pass is a good mechanism because of the reasons that you are saying. So I think it creates that kind of incentive. It's also, you know, I've seen some people on social media say like, oh, you know, like, I've been vaccinated, and I've been in 3 concerts in the past weeks. Maybe I cannot, you know, putting it in questions, you know, maybe I don't have a claim to say that my behavior is more pro-social than that of an unvaccinated person that remain at home. And say, of course, you know, of course, the unvaccinated person who did not go to 3 concerts the past week is having a more pro-social behavior than you are having. And it's enabling that. So the Green Pass mechanism is enabling people that think that that's a good way to behave because they have done their part, that this was getting the vaccine, and that you know, that there's, well, they are allowed also to participate in that kind of event, so there is nothing to fear. So for me, it's like, even if vaccines would be a good, they would be, that it's a bit of a distraction, you know, to have the pass mechanism, because there are other things that are good and we are not doing because we are just focusing on vaccination. You know, I give this example, Luca. See, nuclear energy may be a good way to tackle climate change. It's not the only way. You know, it's like if we were just you know, saying that we need a place to build a new nuclear facility, and then we'll remove a wind farm to do that nuclear facility, and that for the sake of fighting climate change, that would probably be a stupid thing to do, you know. And that's nuclear has its own risks also. You know, you better diversify with many different types of energy sources. So see it a bit like in the same way. But anyway, so you said that you were not having privacy concerns. If I ask you this, you didn't get COVID, I think, even if you were in hospitals. You were wearing your masks. You have been also vaxxed, I think, with all your doses. So you say things that you talk of course, of vaccines in your book, and I think that you have at least you are vaccinated yourself, and that even if the vaccines don't prevent you from being infectious and from passing it to others, if you get COVID, they are very good at preventing death and severe illness, right? So that's the message that should have been always been communicated, right?
Yes, exactly. And And I think that I really don't like binary messages such as vaccines are totally good, vaccines are totally bad. I think that everyone should make their own risk analysis. So for example, I think that definitely the risks of vaccines, or at least our estimation of risk of vaccine was much higher in January 2020 than in December 2020, because in January we had very little data. So there was a lot of uncertainty. So the threshold of risks from COVID that you had to have to justify taking the vaccine was much higher than afterwards. Like right now, we're in December. There is almost no. We've been using the vaccines for 1 year. There is more certainty that the side effects are limited, and that justifies more people getting it. Of course, doesn't still probably justify everyone. I think that everyone should ask themselves, like, what's my risk from COVID? What's my risk? And based on that, evaluate whether it's higher than the risk from vaccines. And I think that for most people, it's a better choice to get the vaccine.
Well, you see, I've gone through the record of you 1 year ago. Things is, I mean, we know much more data. This vaccine has been rolled out to billions, and like right now saying that fat tail risk of the vaccines versus COVID, it's clearly like, I mean, it doesn't even have a lot of sense to have that kind of conversation. What is more risky? You know, there will be a lot more people that have been harmed by COVID, even if there were not 4 billion people who had COVID. So it's the counterfactual that would be 4 billion people having COVID, we would be in such a mess, you know, that we haven't had with the vaccine. So that kind of conversation does not have sense anymore. But when we were having this conversation more than a year ago, we were having it about, like, you know, that you should make that case that not everyone has the same risk for COVID, and that well, if we vaccinate everyone, everyone will have some risks for the vaccine. And apparently, like, you were hesitant. I mean, you said, like, I don't like mandates, which I think most of us who value certain freedoms about the agency over our bodies would agree on that. Maybe there is a good case to be made on doctors or medical personnel. You said something like this 1 year ago, and I think it seems that you have not moved that a lot from that position. I say, even if the vaccines have proved very safe.
Exactly.
Which for me, exactly. It's like your reasoning by first principles. So the risk of the vaccines are much lower today than we were discussing 1.5 years ago. You still think that vaccine mandates are probably a bad idea?
Yes, I think so. I think that what we should do now is to communicate, like, this idea of make your own risk computation, because I think that, like, if you do it and people actually think about it, they will realize that. Because like, one thing is that when we talked last year in January 2021,
it was December. It was December.
Sorry, December 2020, yes.
Yeah.
So there was still a fairly high chance that if you lived in Europe or in the US and you didn't get COVID yet, you could not get COVID. Nowadays, the chance is still there, but it's much lower. Why? Because there are many more cases today than there were 1 year ago. That means that if you are not vaccinated, your risk of catching COVID is much higher today than it was 1 year ago. Which means that your cost-benefit balance shifted more towards getting the vaccine. And given the discourse that nowadays some governments, unfortunately, are making, which is like basically like, we are not taking this seriously anymore, which is something which I really hate. But given that that the US seems to be throwing their hands up and so on, I think that the chance that you will get COVID within the next couple of years I mean you, I mean in general, the person in general is raising. And that means that the balance of should I get vaccinated or not is moving towards.
Well, there is a very mainstream idea being pushed that I don't say that because it's mainstream is stupid. I may have my doubts about it, but it's certainly worth considering. Everyone will get this sooner or later. So you prefer doing this risk analysis that you are saying for your own sake. You prefer have it vaccinated than non-vaccinated, in principle, as assuming that the counterfactual we just discussed is something that more or less can be tested through evidence. That's the case. Now we have been talking for I think slightly more than an hour now. Do you mind if we keep it going a little more?
Yeah, maybe just 10 minutes.
Maybe just 10 minutes.
I just wanted to say on the last part that while I think that there is considerable chances that everyone will get COVID, I think maybe like if I had to give an estimate, which I shouldn't because it's not something that you can really give estimates, but more just as an expression of my feeling, I would put like to 50%. But
what does it even mean, Luca? What do you mean by everyone getting COVID also? You have to tell us.
I mean that given a person that it's more likely than not, then they will catch COVID over the next 2 years.
Okay, so then more than half of the population will get it.
I think that's likely. What I mean with this is that even if you do believe that the proposition I will get COVID one day is true, that doesn't justify just not doing anything. Because when you get it matters a lot. Because you want to make sure that when you get it, there are good cures available and the hospitals are not overcrowded. You want to make sure that when you get that, if you have to get COVID when you get it, you are in this situation. And that is what justifies to me saying we should still wear masks, we should still be careful, and everything like that.
So then it would be, if I understand you well, that at the end, the way to get out of this, it will be by building a better population immunity, but that needs to be spread out in time and built as slowly and safely as possible, so that the fewer people live on the way. If this was done in the first wave, it was the call of some governments, and they had to back it up. Fortunately enough, like in the UK, which is also like people see these changes in policy and they got nuts, which is understandable.
Yes, kind of. Just let me get my charger and I come back in 1 second.
So I was saying that
I still believe that today, if a country wanted to get rid of COVID, they could.
Like a zero COVID type of policy?
Yes, I think not necessarily zero, but something like the quantity of COVID cases that we got in summer, having that across all year. I think that's possible.
You know, in Spain, summer was pretty bad. It seems like it's worse right now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. In general, in most European countries, so to say. Okay.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's possible to look for like the lowest spread that you had over those things and say that's what.
Like the maximal allowable threshold, so to say.
Yes.
And graduate policies over that. But this is the thing, you know, in China, they are doing this effective, what they call the thing, zero dynamic COVID policy or something like that, and they are pretty good at it. I don't know how much is that they are just good at it. I think there's a lot of it that is just explained because they are good at it, or how much is like that it's an authoritarian government and it's easier to implement certain measures, or that just people are more like naturally compliant, or both things. And this is, you know, when they say like we could have these things done, so of course we could do things better. I'm sure you give so many examples, but at which point, like, you know, there will be a democratic cost to that. In Spain, the Madrid regional government got like an overwhelming majority over, you know, having left bars open, so to say, as a general policy action that was not the case in most other places in Spain, you know. So people really, I don't know if you can say if they got lucky, or that maybe putting certain restrictions on bars is just not just effective, at least with certain levels of, like, if you are not doing many other things, you know, this is Swiss cheesing it. But it's the thing, you know, that they think that if you are betting it all on vaccines and not doing all the other parts of the Swiss cheese, I think you talk about the Swiss cheese model in your book. Well, you know, if you are closing bars, but then I don't know, you allow concerts, and the bar is closing at I don't know 10 p.m., but then at 11 p.m. You can go to a disco with allegedly with a mask, but then people remove masks and there is nothing going on. It just doesn't make any sense, you know. Maybe like we should have like a sequencing. I think you even mentioned in the book, you know, I mean, if people are traveling freely intercontinentally, and then you want bars to close by 9, it may not make a big of difference, you know, whether you have a. Whereas if you are doing all the layers in the cheese, then yes.
Yeah, that doesn't make much of a difference. Like, I think it makes less likely to achieve the zero objective, but it does still make a difference in part, because like one other thing that I really hate is when we talk about when we talk it as if it was just either you have 0 cases or you're just letting it rip. But in reality, you have a lot of spectrum of this, because maybe the end situation for your country will be having 100,000 cases a month, and maybe it will be having 10,000 cases a month, and maybe it will be having 10 million cases a month, and that matters a lot, because it matters what will happen if you have to go to the hospital for COVID or not for COVID. It matters on whether classes will have to close because of COVID. It matters on how big is a risk to go to the restaurant. Because like this is another thing. Let's say that you are a relatively frail people, but not like super frail. Someone like my mother. My mother, she's 65. She's in relatively good health, but still she's 65, 67 actually. So she doesn't want to go. Of course, she doesn't want to get COVID, but it's still not to the point that she would stay closed in her house. For her, whether when she goes to the restaurant, it's likely that in that room there is a 10% chance that there is one person with COVID, or whether there is a 90% chance that there are 5 people with COVID, that matters a lot. And that's something that we're not talking about it. Whether we have high endemic COVID or whether we have low endemic COVID, for a lot of people, it makes a world of a difference.
Well, the thing is also that I think that Omicron, and you mention it, but just events go so quick, right? Omicron may be the ultimate game changer. We may have got lucky with Omicron because we were unable to prevent it reaching us from South Africa, where it would have originated. It's still disputable, but all facts point to that direction. It would seem, so you say like when, so new strains always will displace others when they are more contagious, almost by definition. So this one is more contagious. Only when they are very much milder, the balance will be on the switch that, like, you know, the new variant will may end up being how to say a good news, because as long as it's much more contagious but only slightly milder, that means that a lot more people are going to get it and more people are going to die and have severe illness. But it may be that that with Omicron we reach that. I mean, and people are saying so.
Well, so two things. So the problem is one, also that cases, even if they don't lead to death, they clog the hospital system, and that leads to an increase in death in everything else. For example, they just closed in the hospital nearby my like in the town neighboring mine. They just the hospital stopped getting elective surgeries. They stopped getting some kind of patients, and that means that if you are COVID, Omicron meant that your mortality went down. But if you have cancer, Omicron meant that your mortality went up. First thing. Second thing, if you're an immunodepressed person, someone that if they get the virus, they're likely to die, the probability of getting the virus matters much more. And therefore, how contagious is the virus? Is like a virus which is more contagious is bad news for them. So it's not so easy. So Omicron is probably, so I'm still not sure that even if Omicron proved to be 1/3 less severe, it will still be good news. And then one more thing is that we're talking, so first of all, Omicron is still more severe, it seems to be still more severe than the original Wuhan strain. First, it's less severe than Delta, but probably more severe than the original strain. And then another point is that now we're talking about Omicron, but what about Rho, which will be the next variant? That still didn't appear, but it will appear.
Yeah.
So,
and it's also the immunity provided by vaccines may differ a lot. It may even be that Rho is perfectly or even striving among the vaccinated. You know, Omicron, I think that infects almost as effectively vaccinated than the non-vaccinated. Yeah, but well, thing is that I've already taken almost 1 hour and a half of your time, and I think you have things to do. Maybe we can have another discussion. I will enjoy that even soon, even with someone else. If you will be open to that, I will try to make that happen, because I felt that we could keep going talking, maybe even about our own personal situations. You know, I have certain insight to provide, and if so, I'll just close it up by thanking you, Luca, and I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that people buying your book, as I did, they will get the 3 books, right? You will be, as soon as you will publish them, you told that you will be sending them to the people who buy the book, right? So if we only get book 1 right now, book 2 and book 3 will follow later in the year.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Probably around the February and March.
Okay, look forward to that, and well, maybe we can have another talk then. Thank you so much, and have a good end of the weekend.
Thank you, Nacho.
Thank
you as
you.
well.
Bye.
Bye.